athlete training programs for women in sports tech, and she was recently recognised as one of 50 women of influence in sport in Ireland. I'll hand over to you, Grainne.
Thanks, Ian. Yeah. I think I need more stickers. The title sounds great. I prefer to be John. The statisticians are the rock stars in our industry these days, so anyone who prefers the picosecond, and most of us won't know wondering what that is. So I've known John for some time and absolutely world class in his field. So I'm, as I say, SVP of Operations at Stats Perform. I'm really a frustrated sports person. Very average Coe player, and actually not a bone to pick with John. I'm a Manchester United fan, which clearly you're not. And probably, I'd say Alex Ferguson piqued my interest in sports did in his early days, because he was a champion of it after 26 long years of winning nothing. I'm originally from Armagh, so Armagh football, and I live in Limerick, so Limerick hurling fan. So very interested in how that recovery is going, because I'm sure Sean Finn will be looking for something similar. Today I'm going to really talk about a little bit about Sports Tech Ireland and the work, and give you an example of Stats Perform, because I think a lot of you here might be saying, well, how do I work with a company like that? And there's not many of them big, FDIs as they're known in IDL and in the sports industry that are based in Ireland. But I think, come back to John's last point, there's more than we think. So I'm just going to talk about that for a few minutes. And firstly, this is my first time in ATU, so I was wandering around the campus just beforehand, just trying to find my bearings. So thanks for inviting me here to speak. So I just want to talk a little bit about, I suppose, how I ended up at Stats Perform. I was in the health technology company before I was in Salazzo, another HBSU Irish health tech company. And I always had a passion for health and sport, and it's funny how closely then our two worlds can collide. And I think it's about 5 years ago, a bit more than that, I co-founded an initiative called Sports Tech Ireland. And really what we saw was how closely the two industries were aligned, but that Ireland had a real advantage, we felt, in terms of, particularly around the talent space, but actually in growing an industry here. A niche industry, right? I'd say it's the size of the cardboard box industry, the sports industry, which is a really interesting parallel. But really importantly, I think, it's woven into us. And I remember talking to one of the guys in actually Microsoft Sport, and they built their sports product here, and it's a DNA, it's in our DNA, and it's really so true. There's something about it, and it's in our culture, and it's in our, socially, it's just, a lot of us live and breathe sport. And I think we really are at the cusp of something really great, particularly in the data space, in terms of the talent and tech that we have here. So really what we're about is connecting the dots. We try to bring people together with your indigenous company, with your somebody who's looking for a role in this business, with your academic, with your big FTI. So that's what we're about. So we very simple purpose is that people see Ireland as a place to be for sports tech talent, innovation and enterprise. So that's what we're about. That's my passion project, talent, philanthropy, whatever you want to call it. But funny, it led me to my job. I was working in Salazzo, and I started this venture, and I met Stats. Never had heard of them, this Chicago-based company. And the origins of their story actually goes back to 1981. And if you haven't read the book, you might have seen the movie with Brad Pitt. It obviously took data and statistics into the world of baseball. There was a project called Project Scoresheet back in Chicago, and this journalist who started was Stats, and was very much part of our founding story. And I'm just going to show you a short video of what that business looks like now. And William, I hope will this work? that's a bit about staff perform, and I think the piece for us is that data is the foundation of everything we do. So it's the fact that we have such a breadth and depth of historical data enables us now to look at this digital technology world and say, my God, the opportunities are humongous. But really, I suppose, what is it about data? And we very clearly say people want to understand the stories of sport. It is, and it's a very simple thing, and really for us that's the purpose of sports data. And obviously the more granular it is, and go back to what John was going into, the better the story you can tell. So for us it's actually how do we collaborate with all of these companies, how do you layer our tracking data, our event data over biomarkers, what's the potential of all that, and is it a good thing or is it a bad thing? So the next 10 minutes is going to talk about the trends that I see, the 10 big things that I see coming down the track in terms of the future of sports technology. And I did an interesting experiment last night. I went on to ChatGPT and says, tell me the 10 big things that are going to happen in sport. 8 out of 10 coincided with what I was going to talk about, so I thought that wasn't bad. But it was just interesting experiment, even thinking, how is that going to affect, particularly for us because it's sports journalism and the stories we tell, and can you believe it half of what you're writing. But firstly, I wanted to mention how we categorise the industry, and we work off a reference. SportTech are the biggest research company globally for actually having mapped the industry over the last 5 years. And they have a very clear framework. You can subscribe and download the free report, well worth a look. And they talk about for athletes, for fans, and for executives or the business of sport. And I think any of you here, either you're a student or you're a startup company or you work for somebody, it's worth understanding this landscape because this is how sport is thought about now, and particularly with data, it typically runs across all of them. So probably a little different from John. I come at it from a very much this is the business ecosystem that we're living in. And obviously for athletes, we're talking about activity and performance, and that's all of us. Do you know what I mean? Particularly now, it's actually we can all get better at our athletic endeavours, whatever that may be. Particularly for activity, hardware, software, and then go back to on the training field or in recovery. So before and after training. And then for fans, I mean, that's probably the big piece where media and sport have really collided. And you can see that now in terms of Amazon's involvement, Facebook's involvement. The big tech players have taken a media piece from it. The evaluation of rights. We've got to look at the current drama we have this week. And we should mention it, but that's the GA's rights. That's their job, is to commercialise them. The public person won't start talking more about that, where you can see it. We can see rights for NBA coming up now in the US, and it's just it's a race to the top or the bottom, which I think would be a bit. But obviously we're at a stage where in a year's time we can say I can buy the last hole of the golf tournament, and I was there. Do you know what I mean? That's what's changed. It's the streaming technology has done that, and obviously that changes the fan experience, and then you're into the world of fantasy sports and betting. And then obviously for executives, you're dealing with organisations and venues, smart stadiums, and then obviously media and sponsorships. Just what does that industry look like in Ireland? I'll just take an example. We have 10 FDIs here. Actually, EA Games is probably one that's been in Galway for a long, long time. And then there's the likes of Whoop who are new in Dublin, and also another big tech company, Fitbit owned by Google, Peloton recently in Cork. And then with our indigenous ecosystem, pioneers like Oracle, StatSport, Kipman Labs, they were the ones who were trailblazing for, and I see Emma Meehan down there, new startup, who are trailing, they're really there to say this can be done. So very vibrant, we've over 80 startups in this country, or indigenous companies, startups and scale-ups, the ones who have really scaled out the country. So from an enterprise perspective, and it's, that's really worth us thinking about from an industry, and it's all over the country. So what is the 10 big trends? I'm going to start with, it's often misquoted, data is the new oil. That's not what Clive meant at the time, and I suppose the approach, but it's so true. In terms of, but it's our approach to that. How do we mine that? How do we look at it? What's the value of the data? And it brings all kinds of ethical questions with it. But that's where the value is. And I don't know any part of the sports tech industry that is actually not thinking about data. And that's where the opportunity is for a country like Ireland. Second big trend then, and this probably comes on to and John did caution against AI, but for us, AI and analytics is the next step on that data journey. And really it's revolutionised sport. And I suppose for Stats Perform, we would say we're decent at AI because we feel that for about 4 or 5 years. So we were experimenting and doing lots of experiments for a very long time. But actually the technology in the last 12 months is nearly like taking over the work we did for the previous 5 years. It's just been phenomenal. But it's enabled us to maximise the value of our data. And I think the sports really lend itself really well to that learning because of the volumes of data generated. So you'll often see, leading AI scientists who want to work in the sports space. It may not be that they've any interest in sport, but actually the volumes of data and the experiments they get to run make it really interesting. For us, obviously, the ability to create new metrics, and XG would be one, XS then with sales, win probabilities. They're the pieces that we can put that into the hands then of the coach or the performance analyst or whatever. And what makes that so appealing is probably the sports competitive edge. That, come back to Dave Beresford and the 1% or the 0.1%, because the will to win, and if I can get that edge through data over somebody else, then I'm going to arm myself to be the dominant force in data analytics, which is a really interesting conversation. But I think that's the piece is machines can't do what humans do, so each coach with the same set of data will look at it different, and I think that's the piece we talk about. It's human plus technology, and I think that conversation is probably more relevant now than it even was a couple of years ago. So for us, it's actually how do we put the data in the hands of the right people, the athlete, the S&C person, the coach, the person who's looking after their wellness. But I think certainly, and even on a day-to-day basis, we're recruiting, we have 250 people employed in Limerick, and that's our rugby data centre of excellence. And one of the first questions for a part-time job is, do you play FIFA or not? Because that kind of, it's phenomenal to see the difference when you actually put them through your equipment, the people who do, because they're already thinking in that way. And for us, it's taken that to the next level in terms of NLG editorial. What's the layers you can layer on top of the data? Just in terms of the scale, we cover 500,000 games a year, and 3,900 global competition, billions of unique data points. And I think that this is probably what's interesting in terms of, in 2 years' time, we're going to have another 20% of data generated around the globe. How are we going to manage all that data, and the data centers that we required and all the rest of it? But obviously that's just where the technology advances are going. I won't talk too much on this one because I think John's covered it, which is really another big trend is biomechanics and injury prevention. That is just going to be huge. But again, it's back to the data, and it's enabling us to do things that we couldn't do. My biomechanics is not new, do you know what I mean, by any means, but suddenly it looks new. And I think that's where the application of digital and technology is really changing things. Obviously wearable sensors is a key one, and actually that's going to be whether it's a skin patch or it's into your clothes, whether it's smart insoles, and probably of interest as well in terms of what comes into detection, for example, smart mouth guard. I'm sure you've seen that for concussion prevention. Obviously the rugby front you on, into the helmets and stuff like that, where actually it takes the decision out of the athlete's hands or the coach's hand, because the technology is going to be so developed and the data is just going to be clear, which is obviously a good application of it. Wearable devices, obviously this needs no introduction around forever between all the devices we have between our watches and our phones and all the rest of it, and the impact of smartphones and all that connection, and the fact that it's real time and it's in everybody's hands, even that's down to your basic pedometer, so it sort of enables everybody to be their own personal best, and I think that's the best thing about wearable trackers. It does, you can go as far as to quantify itself, and I often feel sorry for athletes these days because there's no break. If you're a Galway footballer these days, there is no break. Do you know what I mean? They are measured to finish their life, everything from nutrition to sleep and to their off time. So there's pros and cons to it, I think. Going on then probably to one that I think is really worth, is probably underutilized so far, I think. And I think we're going to see that in the next 3 to 5 years is the whole place of VR and AR. And I think that immersive technology specifically in healthcare, but also in sport, really is going to change the game. And excuse the point for today's piece. Actually, any of you who have seen this week, well worth a look as the International Rugby Experience in Limerick, which has got some superb immersive tech in it. And you can imagine kicking a ball with Johnny Wilkinson, so well worth a visit. But I think this is it's actually already started in terms of, particularly in the US, where they're actually training with their AR and VR kits. I think there's obviously a big financial investment for companies, but obviously you'll see at Microsoft Halo would be one example. Facebook have just launched some pieces in this, and I think that's where we're going to see a situation where fans are using it as well as in stadiums, as well as players in the training field. Actually, one of the things that I think is worth a look at here, apart from injury rehab, is back to scout and talent identification. And we're seeing that where they're simulating potential scenarios. So I'm going to put X player into this team. How does that look? Are they fit? Because there's no doubt is the reason that what John showed there, where all the money goes into talent, is because that's where the business of sport is. And will that shift go back to training, will go back to skills, or actually it's going to stay in that piece. An opportunity for Ireland, and there's always the great debate about esports versus sports. The Danish government take the opportunity of esports so seriously that they published, and it's a country same size as their own, they published a national strategy for esports in 2021. Well worth a read for anyone, you can download it for free off the internet. When you consider that half the people who watch the Super Bowl, not half the number of people who watch the Super Bowl watched the League of Legends final last year, that's the scale. And obviously, particularly big in Asia, where obviously they've been campaigning to get into Olympics and all the rest of it. But these people train like athletes. These are competitors. And I remember about 4 years ago getting asked a question like, "Do I consider it a sport?" And actually, until it's devolved, that's a real difficult question. If you're looking at, well, there's no pitch, So, but well with the opportunity, and we're certainly seeing teams. Munster Rugby is one example. PSG, Chelsea, they're all running both an esports team and also their own sports team. I see a lot of athletes get involved in this specifically from an investment perspective. So the question is, what is the opportunity for Ireland? I think there's around a dozen esports startups within the country. So some serious athletes. So definitely with a look, because that's going to be a huge industry, estimated to go to 200 billion by 2026. Massive industry. And again, they're the same data points are applying for an esports athlete as it is on the free to play. So that's from an opportunity, from a talent and technology perspective, equally applicable. This one is stadium tech. I mean, I'm sure we're all aware of the smart stadium place, and how does that play in with the athletes on the field, with the clubs that are on the stadium, etc. And obviously we have some phenomenally connected stadiums in Ireland. Croke Park will be exemplary, and some which are still struggling with full connectivity. The NUI Galway Aerodrome is a great example of a smart training facility. But definitely, we can see how this plays into smart cities, particularly, and just how do we play in weather conditions, for example. So that's definitely a trend that's coming, and also how do we engage fans? Cashless experiences, not the GA currently for some stadiums. Janice, I'm sorry for looking at that. But obviously mobile application, and obviously you see it in the US where you can order through your seat, or they're buying merchandise before they've even left the game. How do I get out safely out of the stadium in the event of an emergency? So there's lots of other applications that are not just on the sporting field, but a massive trend is coming down the tracks. And venue analytics, so go back to that data piece. How many do we have this day today? Did they use a second screen? Are they checking out what's happening in the data around the game while they're in the stadium? All of that is really important for the business of sport. And just the future success of just different teams and sports. Cybersecurity, and you'll often have heard this term of cybersecurity as a team sport. That's not what I mean. But obviously cybersecurity is, because you have one chink in your organisation and you've got a problem. But obviously the business of sport is an attraction, for cyber criminals, if you want to call it that way. So certainly any organisation, no matter how small, has got to be thinking about data privacy particularly, and safeguarding their data. And I remember when I was back pre-Stealth Performance in Salasso, and one of the things we knew that there was elite athletes using our platform, because it was recovery, and we had phenomenal contracts in the UK. And so if we get hacked, then suddenly you could, in theory, have really is carrying an ankle injury. So that's the risk to reputationally and to your business, but also in terms of claims. So very important that you're thinking of that from the outset. And I see a really unique advantage or opportunity for Ireland here, because we have a growing reputation in cybersecurity as a nation, and actually we think of how do we apply that to the business of sport, and actually can we make an expertise for ourselves there as Ireland. Sustainability. No organisation worth its salt is not thinking about sustainability these days, but actually applying it to sports. And I recently Adidas put in a full soccer pitch made out of plastic bottles, right? So they're thinking about it. Every big sports brand is thinking about it. It could be renewable energy, the use of water, electricity, everything within an organisation is thinking about it. That's exactly the way Arsenal Football Club is thinking about it, Pro Park, etc. What are they putting in terms of solar panels and all the rest of it, same as we all are doing. Things like green transportation, how are they being assessed in terms of, well, I'm actually not going to support that club, or I'm not going to go to that game if they cannot prove their green credentials. So there is business opportunities there. Again, that convergence of industries. So sustainability with sports, very, very similar to cybersecurity with sports. And from an Ireland perspective, that's a strategy that we should be pursuing. Probably one that naturally is close to parity. I cannot tell you that there's not a conversation I go into with customers that before they don't ask the question of what's your gender balance in your data like, right? And while we see, I can give you an example, and Megan Rapinoe would be a very strong advocate in the US, less than 5% of all sports coverage goes to women's sports. We think it's changed humongously. It's gone from 4 to 5%, so it looks like it's changed considerably. And that's probably because of presenters. But actually, on the field to play, and even in professional sports, it's changed a lot, but it's miles to go. And gender is the first place in the D&I landscape, because we're 50% of the population. But actually, that minorities piece is really one that has to be addressed. London Sport, if you ever had a look at that, have done quite a good job. Their mission is to get London as the fittest city in the world. They really focus into the data around minorities and what's the vision for participation particularly. And that's the piece. If we don't drive participation, we can't drive it to elite level. So, and again, the data around that kind of thing is there, and that's the piece we're going to drive. But certainly from a consumer, from a broadcaster, everything, the responsibility is there, and it is a question that's going to be asked. So I certainly think that's something we've got to be thinking. Fitter Woman is just exemplary in what they've done to drive that conversation. So in terms of, I suppose in summary, and I hope you find that interesting, the Throne Woman, that's just for the Throne Woman at the front who's coming up after me, right? And I think obviously, these are big digital and technological changes that are there for the world of sport. The question is how do you apply them? Because what is sport about? After all, at the end of the day, it's still sport. It's still that passion. It's still that participation. Still that involvement, the fan experience. That can't be replaced by a machine. Do you know what I mean? So it's actually how do we take data and use it for how do I engage the casual fan? How do I give the data nerd, call myself that, what they want? Take the full landscape of all of that. So I think that's the onus that's on the ecosystem to engage in that conversation, none more so in terms of artificial intelligence and the power of that. But I think there's an absolute change coming in the world of sport. It's actually how do we embrace that, and again, protect for good and all of that. So thank you.